Hey everyone, welcome to Be the Change. My name is Lily Mott, and today's episode is about how change comes through challenge. So, today is another solo episode, but I think that it is going to be much more constructive than my last solo episode, the anniversary episode, because I think that I've taken the time to gather my thoughts. As I said, it took me a ton of takes to do that anniversary episode. I think now I've taken the time to gather my thoughts, and this is what I wanted to say in my anniversary episode. So yeah, thank you for bearing with me. This will be the last solo episode before we get back to our regular programming. However, it's not going to be regular programming because the reason that I've been a little bit less consistent with Be the Change podcast and I've been a little bit more scattered, I think, is that I wanted to take the time to reflect. I have been really questioning a lot about Be the Change podcast. So this episode is going to serve as a little bit of a state of the podcast. So thanks for bearing with me. A couple of the questions I've been thinking about are, what is the purpose of Be the Change podcast? What is the purpose of Be the Change Media Network more widely, which is the network that I created? And at this moment, we have 27 podcasts sitting under it. All of them are connected to social impact in some way. And it is an incredible privilege to be able to lead Be the Change Media Network and to have an incredible community that is growing and constantly developing this network with me. Another question I've been thinking about is, what impact am I actually trying to have through this podcast and through this wider work with Be the Change Media Network? The summer has kind of been a time for me to reflect, but I think Be the Change turning 6 also really initiated that reflection. And yeah, so I've spent the last year running Be the Change Media Network full time, just for context for everyone. I've been surrounded by people who are passionate about service, about social impact, about community building, about making the world a better place, however that means to them. And that might sound like an incredible job and an incredible place to live your life. And it absolutely is. I'm so happy, and it is a wonderful place to be. However, over the last few weeks, I've realized something that is pretty uncomfortable for me as a person. I sometimes say this is a joke to people, but I have really built a life that exists almost entirely inside a bubble. And that bubble is a beautiful bubble. It's filled with optimism, social impact, progressivism, service, inspiration, support. Like I said, I joke a lot that I live in this little bubble of people who are so committed to making change, and my life literally consists of waking up in the morning, talking to awesome people, and then going to bed and doing it again the next day. And it's awesome. But recently I've stopped laughing at that joke, and I've started to think about it a little bit more seriously and what that means for me as a person. What happens when almost everyone around you shares similar values and similar goals, similar beliefs, assumptions about the world? What happens when you're rarely challenged? And what happens when disagreements become increasingly rare? And that is something that I think I'm struggling with a little bit right now. I talk a lot about this. I talk a lot about breaking down echo chambers and the importance of challenging your beliefs and meeting people who might disagree with you and having conversations that are productive. And I think that that is so important, but I think that I'm not necessarily practicing what I preach. I encourage listeners all the time to seek different perspectives, to have conversations, to listen before judging, to build relationships with people from different backgrounds, and I haven't been doing that enough myself. Most of the guests that I've interviewed, especially over the last few years, have similar political beliefs to mine. And of course, then I follow them and I interact with them and we become friends. Many of them work in similar sectors. We share similar visions for the future we're trying to create. Most of the content that I create and I help create for different creators or organizations through Be the Change Media Network exists within this similar ecosystem. And that is not a bad thing, because I think that I'm putting out so much positivity and so much love and light and change into a media landscape that can be so dangerous and dark and hateful and divisive. So I do think this is a good thing. I think that it's wonderful that I'm infusing all of these things through my work. But it also means that I'm not encountering as many challenging perspectives as I would like personally. We're living in a world of increasing polarization. And we always talk about this. I feel like polarization is such a buzzword, but it's so true. Algorithms are becoming incredibly effective at feeding us more of the content that we already have. We're talking to ChatGPT and to Claude and to all of these different systems that deteriorate our critical thinking and stop us from questioning the information that is being shared. And the result of that is that many of us are becoming less familiar with information, ways that we gather information, but also less familiar with people that we disagree with. We often think of caricatures of one another rather than the actual people, and rather than actually interacting with them, we have this idea of them in our minds. And often, if it's people you disagree with, it might be this really dark, scary, negative idea of them, rather than actually talking to people and interacting with people who might disagree with you. So when that happens, understanding and reaching a hand across the aisle and empathy becomes really difficult, if not impossible. If I really believe in all of the stuff that I preach, if I really believe that you need to have conversations, you need to listen before judging, and all of those amazing things, I need to be willing to put myself in more situations where my own beliefs are challenged. And I feel like I haven't been doing that enough on this podcast or in my work in general. So I'm going to bring up an example here because this is the example that led me to record this episode. Yesterday, Tommy Robinson spoke at the Oxford Union. And for a little bit of context, the Oxford Union is a debating society at the University of Oxford, and they invite influential, prominent people from all different sectors, all different walks of life, from all around the world. Abby Lee Miller was here a few weeks ago. Young Gravy was here. So people like that, all the way to Tommy Robinson, who is one of the UK's most prominent far-right activists. And there were protests around Tommy Robinson coming. People were arguing that he should not have been invited to speak at the Oxford Union. He shouldn't have been given that platform. And I went to the protests. And as I was standing there, I started to think and look around. And I was thinking, I would probably agree with so many of the people here. I could pick one person out of the crowd and we could grab coffee and we would agree with so much because I do understand where they're coming from. And I do think we would align in a lot of ways. We'd probably have a wonderful conversation. It would end in a lot of, you're totally right. Yeah, of course. It would be a lot of nodding, a lot of laughing. And yeah, we would totally align. We would get along. But not on this. I think that Tommy Robinson absolutely should be given an invite to speak in a place like the Oxford Union. And let's get this 100% clear. Let's get this on the record. It is not because I agree with Tommy Robinson. In fact, I disagree with many of his views. He posts inflammatory, extreme, racist content that I 100% disagree with. So I'm getting that right here on the record. It's not because I agree with him. But it's because institutions like the Oxford Union exist precisely for this purpose. They exist so that difficult, controversial, and even extreme ideas like Tommy Robinson's can be examined and they can be challenged and debated openly and in a constructed forum, right? So they're bringing these people so that then we can see the conversation being had, because so often today, because of our silos that we're in, we're not seeing these beliefs unless we specifically seek them out. So I would never see Tommy Robinson's content, for example, or see his beliefs unless it's a left-wing person criticizing him and reinforcing my beliefs and reinforcing that shadow figure that I've constructed of the far right in my brain, right? But seeing Tommy Robinson speak and debate, and it's not like he's just speaking. There's people questioning him and challenging him. That is directly challenging my thoughts on him, right? Because he's a human standing right in front of me. And seeking out those conversations, seeking out the opportunity to see these people and hear them, and not just hear them, listen to them. That's really important. And I think that we all need more opportunities to engage with one another, rather than retreating from one another and getting deeper into our own belief systems. So with that little story time out of the way, you might be thinking, what does this have to do with Be the Change podcast? Why am I listening to Lily rant about this? And you are asking the right questions. As we enter the 7th year of Be the Change podcast, I want to try something totally different. I want this podcast to become a place for conversations that challenge me. I want to have deeper conversations. I want to have conversations that expand my worldview. I want to have conversations with people whose conclusions I disagree with. I want to invite people on who have vastly different life experiences from my own. I don't want debates. I don't want this to be a debate platform. I'm not trying to be Jubilee Media. If you know anything about Be the Change podcast or Be the Change Media Network, you know I'm not in it for clickbait. I don't want gotcha moments. I'm not trying to create rage bait. I want real conversations. I want conversations rooted in curiosity and a shared love for learning, conversations where both parties enter and are willing to listen to one another. So with that being said, this is my invitation. If you have political beliefs that are different from mine, as I've expressed throughout this episode, I would love to talk. If your vision for the future is different from mine, I'd also love to talk. If you have changed your mind about something important, if you've had great conversations that have changed your mind, changed your perspective, I would love for you to come on the podcast and talk with me about that. If you have a hot take that you think I would disagree with or that the listeners of Be the Change podcast would disagree with, let me know. Come on, let's talk about it. I absolutely want to hear your hot take. I want to chat about this because I have spent 6 years of Be the Change podcast amplifying voices and sharing incredible stories, and that is wonderful. And I will continue doing that. But I also don't want to spend the next 6 years strengthening that bubble around me. I don't want to spend the next 6 years only talking to people who I already agree with. I want to learn. I want to be challenged. I want to understand other people's perspectives. And yes, I do want to change my mind, especially when the evidence and the conversation leads me there. And that is the key point. The mission of Be the Change has always been about making the world better. And I still really believe that. Some episodes, I'm absolutely going to be sharing those inspiring stories and bringing on young changemakers who I want to highlight. But I think another part of making the world better is learning how to talk with one another again. Learning how to disagree with one another without dehumanizing the other person. Learning how to stay curious about the world around us. Learning how to listen. Consider this the new beginning of Be the Change podcast. We're beginning a new era. Change comes through challenge. And I really want to do a better job of challenging my own beliefs. And I hope that you, if you're still listening to this, are also interested in continuing to listen and challenge yourself too. Let's see what we can learn from one another. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, especially if you made it all the way through. Kudos to you. And soon we will be back with regular programming of our Be the Change podcast interviews. But I am really serious with this ask for guest recommendations and self-nominations. If you have suggestions of guests of any age, of any background, who might be open to having a thoughtful, constructive, respectful conversation with me on this podcast, I would love to hear your recommendations. If you want to talk with me about anything I mentioned in this episode, please also reach out to me. My email is lily@bethechangepodcast.org. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave the podcast a rating and a comment because it will help these stories to reach, educate, and inspire more people. And of course, I would love to hear your thoughts, feedback, and guest recommendations. Tune in for my next episode, but until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Bye, guys.